Human Rights Watch says Tanzania authorities have stepped up repression of opposition parties, non-governmental organizations and the media ahead of the country's general elections on October 28, 2020. Well, since mid-June, the government has arrested at least 17 opposition party members and critics of the government, suspended a rights group and cancelled the license of another, and blocked other major rights groups from observing the upcoming elections. The authorities have also imposed new restrictions on the media, revoking the license of a newspaper affiliated with an opposition member and restricting some news outlets because of their reporting on COVID-19, which President John Magufuli says no longer exists in the country. It adopted regulations that ban Tanzanian broadcasters from working with foreign broadcasters without staff from the Tanzania Communications and Regulatory Authority or other government agency present. It also adopted regulations that criminalize a broad range of social media and online posts, including those that support organizing demonstrations or that promote homosexuality. The authorities have also fined or suspended media outlets for covering politically sensitive topics, including the coronavirus.
Well, joining us now to discuss more on the suppression of press freedom in Tanzania is journalist with the Southern African Times, FARAI MUVUTI. FARAI, good to have you join us this hour. Let's quickly get your reaction about this ban on local broadcasters, preventing them from carrying foreign content without government permission.
Well, thank you for having me yet again. Well, so our interaction with government has been to ascertain both sides of the narrative. As you can imagine, we are to try to deliver a nuanced perspective of what is actually going on. Our interaction so far from government, the Tanzanian government is arguing that actually it isn't suppressing. What they're doing is localizing in terms of their content, reportage or narrative content that speaks to its economic base and equally its social political reality. And part of doing so, they have argued that due to the new challenge that the diverse media presents, they are saying that they want to preserve local values and local norms. And and to buttress this point, they are saying that, listen, we have the existence of over 152 radio stations, of which 3 are government owned, and we have over 34 newspapers, of which less than 5 are government owned, and we equally have a wide diversity in terms of our media presence. As an additional evidence, they suggested having 34 TV stations, which pretty much tops them up within the region. So they're arguing that actually what we're not doing, we're not trying to repress. We're trying to have a localized approach, because what tends to happen is that when there is foreign media involved or when there are foreign media partnerships, they do not carry the value systems that are espoused in the media laws of the country, and they have put in place what they've termed additional guidance that work alongside these broadcasting corporations to ensure that they follow due process and do not breach what they termed the Media Act of 2016, which has since been upgraded to since 2018, and of course the new guidelines that have been presented by the national broadcaster. But of course, critics are arguing contrary to that. They're saying that this presents a potential of repression in terms of those contrary to what government's position would be, that may not necessarily basis that agreeable to their actions or holding them accountable. So these are the two sides of the argument. Now, from my assessment, based on my interaction, we can look at it from both sides. I think one has to look at the historical context that forms these, especially a country like Tanzania, whose impact in terms of whose aspiration rather in terms of wanting to see economic growth, they see the national interest potential that media reporting that at times may not be well informed or be backed by external forces, as it were, may have a negative impact on their market ability to borrow and equally to grow their economy.
It's good that you brought in your own, even though the sense you made of it all, because from what you were saying, government seems to have a point based on what they are saying. But FARAI, Human Rights Watch are accusing, they're accusing Tanzanian authorities of stepping up repression of opposition parties, NGOs, and the media, ahead of the country's elections. What's your sense of this allegation coming from the human rights?
Well, I did follow the human rights report as well as looked at the Amnesty International report as well. What you find with these reports that they're equally not locally published, which government is arguing that, well, they should publish them locally so we can equally argue the issues locally as well. So, and the sentiment from journalists, that be it from state departments or equally from the private sector, there is a mixed view on this issue. There isn't a monolithic disposition that suggests that this indeed is the case. So I don't think that even in their report, it's more conjecture than it actually is valid fact. But what we can point to is the arrest of the arrest of a journalist, in which when we looked at the reports of partly the reasons why they were arrested was as a consequence of what government deemed to be economic sabotage, and because the laws do not allow bail hearings on this particular issue, he was not allowed to have bail. That is the context that we received from government. Now, in terms of so one has to look at it from two aspects. There is, of course, the moral argument that is the action or the heavy-handedness of governance when it comes to responding to what it may term to be economic sabotage. Is it heavy? Is it appropriate? Is it disproportionate or appropriate? That is the one aspect. But then on the legality aspect of it, law tends to not look at the moral holds bar. The legalities, the law tends to be the law as it is. So it's not about what our feelings or emotions are on the basis of our value and ethics, but what the law stands to be.
Well, government and moral issues look at preserving local values and norms, while critics say it's a potential for repression. But how are media houses reacting to this?
Well, as I said, it's a mixed bunch because not all media reports, not all media houses carry the same sentiment. What you are seeing, however, is, of course, an extended approach to wanting to ensure that they wrap up, their campaign against any laws that seem to steer away from the current way of the current mode of operandi. So you might see that there's going to be a heightened pressure towards ensuring that these changes do not impede on media's ability to continuously report in the manner that they've been reporting. But when we speak to ministry, for instance, they argue that, well, actually, that will not be the case. They will still be able to report alongside their external partners, only this time with the additional guidance of a local governing authority to preserve the ethics laws that are in place in the country.
All right, FARAI, let's discuss the issue that has to do with the opposition leader, Tundu Lissu. The government is claiming that the interview he was granted was misleading. How misleading is this interview? I'd ask you. And then he claimed that interview that government did not allow him to pay his last respect to the late former president, Benjamin Nkapa. And then add to that, it seems like the media did not give the government the chance to state its own side of the story, balancing it. That's what the government is saying.
Yeah, and I think this is what's quite interesting, the question that you've asked, purely because if you look at the on the one side, the opposition leader is presenting his now the question around whether I find it misleading or if the reports of it being misleading are. Am I still here? Oh, sorry, I don't know where I left off. Sorry.
Well, you left off where you were talking about the misleading interview claimed by government of the opposition leader Tundu Lissu, and the fact he was not allowed to pay his last respects to the late former leader Benjamin Nkapa, and then government saying that they didn't balance it. They didn't allow government to state their own side of the story. What's your sense of all that?
Okay, so thank you so much. So I think my sentiment on that, especially when commenting on personal experience, it's very subjective. So there isn't an established fact because it's what they claim to be the experience. One can only take it on their word. Now, as coming on to government, in terms of the government side of things, which is what I find very interesting, is that, as I had alluded to earlier, that there's a broader and bigger, wider presence of independent media than there is state media. In fact, government is increasing its spending on state media so that it can equally have the ability to share its own positions on issues that are controversial, which I think we are yet to see how balanced and how representative that state media will become as a consequence of its new financial injection. But maybe the parting point on the issue of the opposition leader, I think naturally it would be the job of the opposition to oppose. So it will be now down to the constituent, but equally maybe further looking at the validity of what they're saying. But because it's subjective, as I said, it's very difficult to then establish what is the fact or lack thereof in that case.
All right, FARAI, I wonder when this ban takes effect, and I'm compelled to ask because the ban also includes Tanzanian journalists from working with foreign correspondents unless they are accompanied by a government minder. Are you accompanied as you speak with us?
Well, fortunately not. Okay, but the Southern African Times is not beholden to the Tanzanian government, so in this instance, we will be considered foreign.
Okay.
But I suppose what they're arguing, which we're trying to understand from both sides, right? What they're arguing is that, listen, over the years, when reports have gone out into the world pertaining to our country, in partnership with large broadcasters like DW and the BBC and so forth, they seem to have they carry the editorial position or the editorial policies of the country that is external. And there is no localized approach that preserves the cultural norm and the nuances that government, because they're saying you can criticize us, but at least criticize us fairly, is what their arguments are saying. And in part of that argument, they're simply saying that they cannot be limitless. There cannot be media without a limitation, without a limitation in terms of how it's approached. There are ethics, there are standards of journalism in every country, and this is not unique to their territory. Now, we may argue about whether the approach is appropriate or inappropriate. I think that's another question around values and what the domestic approach in terms of the media approach is. But I think, because this debate goes wider to not just newspapers and broadcasting, but it also is going wider to filmmaking and music consumption. They're looking at how they can localize their content as a preserve of their cultural norm.
All right, before we let you go, all right, FARAI, we'll leave it here. Thank you so much for being on Newsday.